2026, the year that everybody looked at the lefty and thought to yourself, a freaking scumbag. And the more we get into this year, the more the chickens are coming home to roost. If you're a lefty and a socialist and a communist, you can do one. Because the more we getting into this year, the more all of their rhetoric is just falling apart. And I'm going to show you the latest examples of that today and how that also impacts us in South Africa. So let's start off with the first one, and that is New Scotland Yard. Now, for those of you who don't know, New Scotland Yard had a diversity scheme. Yes, a diversity scheme implemented by, Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, also known as the Islamist Mayor of London. Now, more than 1 in 5 of the police officers hired in 2019 were from this diversity scheme. And according to the latest reports, these individuals went on to commit misconduct or criminal offences, including assault and drug offences. Now, an example of that is Cliff Mitchell, who failed vetting, but a panel overturned the decision because, them diversity is our strength. And the panel forced the Met to allow him to join to boost diversity quotas because, that's the way London works. But in any case, he went on to commit 13 counts of assault and is now serving a 17.5-year prison sentence for his offences. So them diversity is a strength. Now, where else we are currently seeing diversity being a strength? Well, we're actually seeing it in the United States, specifically in Democrat, also known as sanctuary-run states. Now, for those of you who don't know, George Floyd came out of one such state, and it would now appear, now that Donald Trump is back in office, that the left, the mental retards that they are trying to re-instigate a George Floyd version 2. Now, this comes after a fatal ICE-related shooting, which has sparked renewed controversy and protests.
We do have breaking news. Let's go there. We're going to South Minneapolis right now. And we are watching this scene unfold. We've had this up inside our studio for a minute, just watching to see. Authorities are responding to an ICE-involved shooting. That's how it's being described by the people in South Minneapolis right now. We now have a reporter there. Earlier today, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz posted that his public safety team is working to get more information and urge people to remain calm. And moments ago, the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Fry, said they are working to get ICE out of his state. A lot going on, or his city. Senior correspondent Mike Tobin is on the ground for us in South Minneapolis. Mike.
And the police tape is up right now. As you can see, it's a several block area behind me that is tied off. The tear gas has already been used because each time you get one of these ICE events or a Border Patrol scene, you get the protesters who descend on it. That has already happened here. The details we know thus far is that the person who was shot is a woman. We don't really know much about her condition at this point. No agents have been harmed. There is some discussion that it was triggered by a ramming incident that we see so often when ICE and Border Patrol agents are conducting their operations. So we're talking about one person injured that we know of thus far. The FBI is the investigating agency on the scene here. You see some local police behind me. They are just controlling the scene because you get the protesters who descend on it. Again, tear gas has been used in this incident. And you mentioned that Jacob Fry is now demanding that all ICE, all federal agents leave the city of Minneapolis. He says they are causing chaos. And the quote is, they stand rock solid with the immigrant and refugee communities. So all the information right now, Harris, is preliminary. Right. That's what we're working with. One person shot.
Yeah, and I'm looking down, reading that ex-post right now from Mayor Jacob Fry, and also just some of the other information coming out. So now it's a little bit clearer. So it's a ramming and a shooting there. We were getting reports of both.
Now, for those of you who don't know who ICE are, ICE is effectively the border control individuals. They're going into states, finding all the individuals that shouldn't be there, and they're effectively deporting them. But these individuals are constantly landing up in conflict with local politicians and activists on ground floor. Now, these are federal officers who are ending up having rows with the local politicians. Now, one such example of this was in Minneapolis, where an ICE shooting occurred. Now, what actually happened is an ICE officer fatally shot a woman during an immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis. Now, this has triggered protests and national political firestorms. with individuals trying to spark a new George Floyd type movement. Now, the incident occurred amid tensions between federal immigration enforcement and all of these sanctuary city policies. Now, footage from the scene rapidly circulated online, became central to competing political narratives because the politicians really don't care what actually happened. They just want to stoke as much anger and resentment as possible. Now, federal officers initially framed the incident as domestic terrorism directed at the ICE agents. But you see, the video footage released complicated that narrative.
Get the fuck out of our neighborhood!
What the fuck? Dude, what the fuck? Dude, you did a murder for what?
Now, the video footage itself showed chaotic moments around a vehicle and an agent, and this led to the mayor publicly rejecting the federal framing, calling it, and I quote, bullshit, and accusing us of escalating the situation. So hopefully at this point in time, you're listening to what I'm saying and going, I don't know what happened. And to be honest, that's actually exactly how everybody was. Nobody really understood what was happening. We knew that somebody had been shot, that it involved an ICE officer, and we know that the mayor said that he was very unhappy with us being in his area and that they should footsack, they should leave. Now, it turned out upon investigation that a woman had been stalking and impeding ICE agents for hours before the shooting. Now, that woman then weaponized her vehicle, attempting to severely injure or kill agents during what had been described as lawful enforcement operations. Now, the reason that the agents had shot in self-defense was because the woman had weaponized her vehicle and attempted to injure him with her vehicle, which means that in law, the responsibility was clearly placed upon the deceased for attempting to kill a federal officer.
Because of the adverse weather that Minneapolis has seen in recent snow, one of the vehicles became stuck and ensnared in the snow. Law enforcement were attempting to push out this vehicle, and when a mob of agitators that were harassing them all day began blocking them in, shouting at them, and impeding law enforcement operations. ICE officers and agents approached the vehicle of the individual in question, who was blocking the officers in with her vehicle, and she had been stalking and impeding their work all throughout the day. ICE agents repeatedly ordered her to get out of the car and to stop obstructing law enforcement, but she refused to obey their commands. She then proceeded to weaponize her vehicle, and she attempted to run a law enforcement officer over. This appears as an attempt to kill or to cause bodily harm to agents, an act of domestic terrorism. The ICE officer, fearing for his life and the other officers around him and the safety of the public, fired defensive shots. He used his training to save his own life and that of his colleagues.
Now, video footage captured actually showed a distressed woman who identified herself as the victim's wife. So it turned out that the victim had been in a gay or lesbian relationship, and they were said to have had a 6-year-old child. Now, she had been outside the vehicle filming when the incident occurred, which has led some individuals to suggest that what they were attempting to do was actually manufacture a narrative, although they didn't think it would land up in her being killed. Now, from the footage, you can see she says, they shot her in the head, I made her come down here, it's my fault, they just shot my wife. And the reason for that is because these leftists are attempting to cause a political disaster. They're trying to do things for clickbait and for outrage. And in this instance, it's led to the death of one of the so-called lefty activists. Now, the footage itself intensified public anger and deepened distrust of official explanations because in typical fashion, the mayor in that city attempted to use the incident in order to inflame tensions between the right and the left. This is what they typically do, time and time again. Now, Donald Trump weighed in and said that after reviewing the footage, he called it horrible to watch. Trump said that the woman in the car rammed an ICE agent, who survived and is now recovering in hospital. He described the woman screaming in the vehicle as a professional agitator and said that the shooting appeared to be self-defense. He blamed the incident on the radical left and argued that ICE agents are being threatened, assaulted, and targeted daily, all of which is factual. Now, in New York City, Mamdani, the new mayor, remember the new Islamist mayor of New York, was pressed at a press conference over public safety following the shooting. Now, again, reporters in many of these states are basically activists, because a reporter asked how immigrants can trust the New York Police Department to protect them from ICE, not assist federal agents. Now, you've got to ask yourself why a reporter is asking them to trust New York City to aid and abet illegal immigrants, but that's another story entirely. Now, Mamdani reaffirmed New York's sanctuary status, stating that the New York Police Department would help those seeking sanctuary and not participate in federal enforcement actions. But remember, being an illegal immigrant in the country is, well, illegal.
It happened in Minneapolis. An ICE agent shot a woman directly and killed her instantly. And we know that in the previous administration, there were a lot of run-ins with ICE in the city where New Yorkers thought that NYPD officers were either protecting or assisting ICE agents. So how can New Yorkers, under your mayorship, trust that NYPD, when those situations arise, will be there to protect them and not to protect mass secret agents?
Well, I first just want to make clear that the news coming out of Minneapolis is horrific. This is one part of what has been a year full of cruelty. And we know that when ICE agents attack immigrants, they attack every single one of us across this country. And this is a city and will always be a city that stands up for immigrants across the 5 boroughs. And I have made it clear to everyone within my city government, and that extends to NYPD, that we are going to uphold our sanctuary city policies. We are going to adhere to them. That is why one of the 11 executive orders that we signed was to repeal the previous administration's order to allow for collaboration with ICE on Rikers Island. What we are going to be doing is following the laws that we have set, laws which have kept New Yorkers safe. And we are going to make it clear to each and every person in the city what their rights are. That's why we took the time to make a Know Your Rights video, because it goes back to the earlier question. If you don't know of your rights, then how can you be expected to actually use those rights? So we are going to take every opportunity we have to inform New Yorkers of what they already can do, and also to make it clear to our own city government agencies and departments across the board, including NYPD, that we are not here to assist ICE agents in their work. We are here to follow the laws of New York City.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, the incident itself exposes a fracturing of authority inside the United States, with federal law enforcement having local powwows with local government, because these local governments have all been infiltrated by lefty, crazy individuals. Now, this national immigration policy is now being disputed at city level, where there is clear resistance against the national immigration policy, because what we are seeing, as I said, is that many of these localities have been taken over by the far left, and they want to enforce their own policies, despite what the national policy is. Now, Mamdani himself is actually a very interesting individual for us to go on to, because according to Mamdani, he is a socialist, and as a socialist, well, he wants to have a specific brand of socialism in New York City. Would you know it? It actually comes from South Africa. Yes, he says that South Africa's model should be emulated in America. Now, the problem is that there is a new generation of American socialists who all promote collectivism without any form of historical understanding, and it's often shaped by university activism rather than any form of lived experience. When these university grads go out and talk to people that have come from socialist shitholes, many of the socialist shithole survivors say that these individuals are nuts. Now, during the Cold War, Soviet officials mocked Western socialists as useful idiots, a comparison that you can see now today. Many of these useful idiots are all promoting the same bull rubbish. Now, Mamdani himself wishes to promote radical policies such as seizing the means of production. Yeah, we've heard that before in the Marxist Manifesto, whilst personally benefiting from elite lifestyles, because this is also what we tend to see with these champagne socialists. We saw this very clearly even in Venezuela, because if you look at Venezuela, it's a good example of how modern socialists live. Once a very wealthy and oil-rich country, praised by US socialists, well, it quickly collapsed into starvation, repression, and economic rule. Now, socialist control of Venezuela's oil industry ended up causing the production of oil to completely collapse, triggering mass poverty and immigration. As I've said in previous videos, 8 million individuals left Venezuela. Now, the regime survived only by suppressing elections and importing Cuban military and security forces to prop up the regime. Now, Venezuela is completely discredited, and yet US socialists are still switching models to the failed Venezuelan model. And Mamdani himself points to South Africa as a model, invoking Nelson Mandela and the Freedom Charter. Now, one of the things that Mamdani doesn't really seem to notice is South Africa's high crime rate, a failing economy, and the allegations of property confiscation, which goes on in the US, well, because of Trump's narrative. Now, Cuba itself is also cited by many of these champagne socialists as a success story, mainly based on literacy and healthcare claims. Although, if you actually go through and scrutinize those any further, you'd realize that they complete bull rubbish. Cuba's economy basically doesn't exist, its political repression is severe, and its population has fled in the millions all over the world. Now, Cuba itself depended on Venezuelan oil and sent troops to help repress Venezuelans in exchange for oil. So you can see how all these socialists tend to prop each other up. Now, what we're seeing all over the world with the young individuals, the useful idiots, as they wish to embrace socialism, is that in many instances, the very people who promote it shield them from all the historical failures. Nobody teaches them the personal economic struggles that have been caused by these policies. Instead, what we're seeing is that many of these radical activists go to occupy government roles and openly advocate for property seizures, dismantling capitalism, and ideological governance. And we're seeing that right now in sanctuary states in the US, and we're seeing it with politicians such as Mamdani. Now, all these socialist defenders will prove history right again. There's nothing useful in repeating past mistakes, but it's all going to occur. Now, the fact that Mamdani says that he wishes to emulate South Africa itself should cause concern, because it's the useful idiots of South Africa, the young being educated and indoctrinated into socialism, that is going to be the potential downfall of this country in the future. Now, turning to Venezuela, Donald Trump states that the US will run Venezuela and dictate decisions and control oil sales for years, possibly indefinitely. Now, he's not actually framing his occupation of the US as an occupation, but rather as an oversight or a rebuilding or stability management type maneuver. Yeah, so we've gone from Russia's military operations to Trump's oversight operations. Newspeak, what can I say? So Trump explicitly says that Venezuela's oil will be taken, sold by the US, and the proceeds controlled by Washington spent largely on American-made goods. Venezuela holds one of the largest oil reserves on the earth, especially heavy crude oil, which is suited to US Gulf refineries. Now, the US plans immediately to sell between 30 and 50 million barrels of seized Venezuelan oil, and energy officials confirm US control of product and sales almost indefinitely. So many individuals have said, well, because of this, we know the whole operation of Venezuela was, well, because of oil. But in any case, the US frames the capture of Maduro as drug terrorism enforcement action and not as war, and certainly not as resource grabbing. Now, US officials insist that no boots will be on the ground, but full political and economic control will occur. How this actually occurs, I don't know. So what's next for Venezuela? Well, the US has signaled that the Interior Minister and the Defense Minister are temporarily due to be tolerated, but potential future targets for US action. Now, US intelligence assesses that Venezuela's opposition cannot maintain order, So former regime figures are being used to keep stability. So they're not just bringing in the opposition to take control, they're using the existing individuals plus some opposition individuals to reform a new government. Don't know how this is all going to work out. Now, emergency UN sessions were all conducted to condemn the US for their action. And this all came from BRICS countries, Latin American countries, and parts of Europe, specifically the western part of Europe, that are now dipping their feet into socialism. Now, analysts are arguing that this whole maneuver of giving BRICS a new life as the US abandons the pretense of the rules-based order. And so what they're now saying is that these countries are all going to have to form their own coherent allies and potentially have their own blocks to compete against each other. And BRICS will be one of those such blocks, with the US and its potential allies being a competing one. Not really a rules-based order anymore, but rather a might makes right-based order. So what has this actually all led to? Well, oil prices fell as markets price in the increased supply and the reduced geopolitical risk. And what we actually saw in South Africa is that the JSE dipped, with Sasol and mining stocks all being hit. And what we're due to see in South Africa is petrol price will go down massively because there's an oversupply now of oil. Now that itself will bring down your day-to-day expenses because, well, everything is dictated by the oil price. You need oil to transport goods. So we should see many of our prices in South Africa ease. Well, that's if obviously people pass on the savings, which I must be honest and say I severely doubt. Now moving on to a very final news story, and this is the news story that Nelson Mandela University has appointed Nalandi Pandor as their chancellor. Yay! The university praises her academic credentials, her public service, and her international standing. And her appointment has been framed as ceremonial and inspirational. It's so inspirational to appoint our very own Islamist. In any case, the South African Zionist Federation issued a searing condemnation, arguing that the Chancellor embodies moral authority and is not just symbolic. And according to them, well, the Lady Pandor is hardly a moral figure because 1 week after the 7th of October massacres 2023, Pandor phoned the Hamas leader and offered solidarity. Yep, that actually genuinely occurred. This is being described as granting moral legitimacy to a terrorist organization that committed a terrorist offense. Now, the use of Pandor repeatedly of jihadi rhetoric is also viewed as endorsing violent framing, and we've seen numerous examples of that. In fact, I've shown those on this very channel. With her other organizations, such as the Nelson Mandela Foundation, also funding calls to target Christian Zionism, which has been criticized as ideological activism, where you basically got the Nelson Mandela Foundation being captured by Islamists and trying to adopt an Islamist bend. Now, for those of you who watch this channel, you'll notice that Pandor had her US visa cancelled because of her Islamist activism. And so the bigger picture here is that really what we're seeing at the Nelson Mandela Bay University is that there has been a degree of institutional capture with forms of moral inversion, and this itself is eroding Mandela's legacy. But you see, none of this is really about Mandela's legacy, because what's typically happening with many of these Islamist type activists or these far left activists is that they're very happy to hijack the legacies of those who came before them, so long as that they can use those legacies to push forward their own political activism and push through their own agendas. And that's exactly what we see with Pandor time and time again. But you may ask me, why do I focus on all of this? And there's a reason for it. And the reason for it is, coming back to South Africa itself, South Africa is too easy to capture. Police capture, state capture, this capture, that capture. And so the latest version of it is now, well, it's Islamist capture. It's the capture of everybody, because this country does not have the appropriate checks and balances to stop it being captured. And being captured by this specific form of political ideology is disastrous for a state. And so we really should push back against it. In any case, that's my views. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. And until next time, bye.